I actually started doing this before starting the screencast, and so I'm going to try to use this as just a little nugget for Git. And I don't know if you've noticed this yet, but well, NetBeans has an undo feature, and that's so on Windows it's Control Z, on the Mac it's Command Z. So if there's something I want to undo, I can do all that. But if I've saved the file, I think that it doesn't allow me to do that. But in the case of Git, what NetBeans does is it identifies the things that have been added. So here I've added some stuff, but because I forgot to start the screencast, I want to undo that and just kind of do it again. So now notice that the manager class is listed in green, in blue. Blue means it's been changed. Green means it's added. And that applies both in the file name and in the editor itself. So the file has been changed, and so manager, in fact, if I hover on it, notice that it says briefly that it has been modified, which it has. But let's say, now has this ever happened to you? It happens to me. I've done a bunch of editing, and I said, everything I've done since I started doing this is just garbage. And I just want to throw it away. And I've saved it, so I can't undo the undo. So what are my options? Without Git or something like it, my only option is to try to remember everything that I've done and try to fix that. But again, if I want to just blow away everything I've done and I have something that's blue, what I can do is I can simply right-click on it and select Git, Revert Modifications. And what that will do is that will put it back into the state that it was when I began editing. It'll undo all the changes that I've made. So I mean, and there's no way to recover from that, by the way. So if you need to be really sure that there's nothing that I want to save from this. So if there's nothing I want to save from that, and it says, oh, by the way, you're about to do something that is unrecoverable, I say, okay, I'm fine with that. And then notice that it put my file back in the state that it was at the beginning. That's a very useful thing if you write a lot of code that is simply crap. And that happens to me a lot. So it probably doesn't happen to you, but just in the in the remote possibility that it does, you now have a little thing to do that. Okay, so we're going to give our managers a bonus. And for whatever reason, we're going to use it as an int. And all that typing we have to do for our setters and getters is negated by the fact that we have this little refactor, and that means it's called encapsulate fields, and that's not the best name because it doesn't really describe it. It describes what it is, but in kind of a highfalutin way. Other IDEs have something more like generate setters and getters. That's a little more descriptive. But this is what NetBeans says, and we get a choice to either select both, which I want here. And one thing you just have to watch out for, the fields visibility. Again, it gives me the option of having all of them. You want to make sure that it's private in this case. The accessors visibility, see, we can make a protected setter or getter, again, but for now we're going to keep them all public. And then where they put it, for some reason their default place is just kind of weird. So I like to put it after as the last method. And again, just with a couple of clicks, that took a long time because I was talking. But just basically with a couple clicks, these setters and getters are generated, and so encapsulation is preserved. So the criticism of all that typing is demonstrated to be false. I mean, a few clicks and an OK is hard, and a guarantee that the names will be implemented correctly, and that's not such a big deal. So the thing is that for manager, though, what we want to do is override the salary, the get salary method. And that should be an employee, as it is. Okay. And in fact, the book talks about recommending when you override a method to use this little @override thing. And NetBeans prompts you for that. That's, again, whenever you see this little light bulb on the right-hand side, it's NetBeans offering some help. And NetBeans help tends to be a little better than Clippy's help, if you remember Clippy. And when it's coupled with a red thing, it means that there's actually an error. It's something you need to pay attention to. This override, it's because this is called an annotation. We'll briefly talk about these at some point. And they're useful because if I'm looking at this class and I see that override, that means that that I'm overriding something. Okay.
Used to test their getters and setters, or just the main functions and not the getters and setters?
I'm not quite following.
People usually, well, you told us that we should test each of our functions, each of our methods, right? Do people tend to test the getters and setters?
There's actually two schools of thought on that. The strict school of thought says you should test everything. To me, these are setters. A pure setter and getter that just passes through the value. To me, I tend to not do it. However, there are situations, and I think I've mentioned that, and actually bonus is, this particular one is one of those, but we don't have the machinery to handle it yet because that involves something called exceptions. In this case, so for the getter is just going to return the value. It's a primitive, so I don't have to worry about that. But the setter here is something where if I give it a bad value, like a negative value, then it's not going to really work the way I want. In other words, a negative bonus means, okay, I have a certain salary, but when I get my paycheck, it's going to be less than what my salary is. And most of us are not terribly happy about that, unless there's a reason for a deduction or something. But so a negative bonus would say, okay, you screwed up, so we're going to take away your pay. In this case, the setter has, I really only want positive value, or at least non-negative values here. If I have zero bonus, then okay, fine. But a negative bonus, again, is not allowed. So if there's something in the setter that I need to do specially, like test it for the value, then I will test this method to make sure that it's throwing the exception that I need. Now, we haven't talked about exceptions, so I can't do that yet. But that's a good bit. Now, this get salary, that looks like a getter. It actually is a getter for the superclass. But now it's going to be a little bit more. So the idea okay, now remember that
salary has SALA.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. I mean, Java doesn't care, but you're right. You want to make these now. The problem here, okay, what's the problem? The problem is that what if I wanted to do this? So okay, so the idea is that the bonus is bonus. Okay, so this looks like this ought to work. Oops, let's see if I get the. In other words, salary is an instance variable that this object has. Remember, everything in the superclass I have in the subclass. Salary was defined in employee. Oops, not in person, employee. There it is. And manager extends employee. And in fact, this manager object has that salary variable. It's in there. The problem is that it is private, which means that only specific instances, only of employee, not of the subclasses, can have direct access to it. And that's the strictest form of encapsulation. In other words, I can see it, and if there's a subclass, then you have it, but you can't see it. Okay, so like I got an elephant here. Yep, there he is. No, I'm not going to show it to you. All right, so what can you do? Well, that's where I need to do this. Okay, so this, now I'll leave this as a comment. All right, so first I'm going to get the base salary. Actually, here, I'm going to call this base salary, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to return the base salary plus the bonus, which is going to be a percent of the base salary. So it's going to be the base salary times the bonus. And again, I could use the getter here. Now remember, what I'm going to do is the bonus is going to be just an integer that represents a percent. So as a percent, I need to divide it by 100. Now, this used to be a bigger deal in the old days, but which is faster, division or multiplication on the computer? Multiplication is faster, just across the board. Why? Because, well, if you have to do it by hand, is it faster to do multiplication or division? It's the same thing on the computer. In other words, division is a little bit faster. Now, that's not such of an issue anymore, but just in general, should I divide or should I multiply? Well, dividing by 100 and multiplying by 0.01 are mathematically equivalent. On the digital computer, what do they do? They might do slightly different things, but whatever they do are going to be, either way, the digital computer is not going to 100% accurately represent what is going on. Okay? So here's my manager, and let's okay. Now let's add some of these other two things. So we have our student. Well, let's add the engineer first. So we have an engineer, and we don't give bonuses to the engineers. But they are an employee, and again, as with yesterday, as soon as I define the class, I start getting these strange errors, but they're not strange to you anymore, right? What are these errors I'm getting? What do they have to do with? The constructor. And you say, what constructor? The constructor that the Java added because I didn't define one. And it added a zero argument constructor, and then having added it, it said, oh, you didn't write the first call to super, so I'm going to put that in for you. But then when it goes to call super, we see that employee has two constructors. One needs a string, and one needs a string, a double, and a local date. So what do I have to do here? Well, what I have to do, let's see, what did I do for manager? Okay, I just gave the name. But likewise for this, if I have multiple constructors and I want to make sure that they're all in play, I need to at least specify the master constructor. And then, okay, this now has multiple complaints. The first complaint is it can't find the symbol local date. So that's something you need to fix first. And okay, how do I know how to fix it? There are two ways to fix it. One is I could kind of click on here and it will suggest adding the import, or especially if I have a bunch of these, and you shouldn't have too many of these, if I just say right click and I say fix imports, it will add this import, keeping in mind that import doesn't import anything, so it's terribly named. Okay, so there's the super, and now at least the class is satisfied, and I really should do the same thing for here. And again, it can't find the symbol, so let's just do it that way. Now, right here, I've kind of violated one of the rules that I mentioned, which is I have two calls to super, and I've said that that's not such a great idea. So you want to have only one call to super. So I need to decide which one it's going to be. And in this case, what I need to, what I should do is call this with the default, and what I decided is that the default, if I don't give a date, it's going to be now, today. Now, again, it's there's actually a reason why this is called now, but now is not, for a local date, now isn't now. Now is like all 24 hours of today. Why? Because there's a similar class called local date time, and for local date time, now is actually now up to the millisecond. So that's that. Okay, so now we have managers and engineers. So let's kind of see how. Let's go back to where we had a little test thing here. So just to see what we had. Okay, we had one employee, and we actually defined him to be a person, which is kind of interesting. Let's define an array of these guys. Oh, let's give ourselves just 3 of them.
The second employee.
Pardon me? Employee. Thank you. Oops, employee. Okay, and it's still complaining. Why is it complaining? Oh, again, well, let's ask it. It can't find the symbol. And again, this bears repeating. It can't find the symbol because even though this looks like it's a sub-package of CS2173 and the employee is in CS2173, the quote imports are by the full name of the package. That you don't get the it doesn't automatically import the other stuff. So I need to fix the imports, and now it has imported employee. Again, notice that's green, so that means it's been added. All right, now, because I have specified, say, okay, these are my employees, and I've defined it as an array. Okay, so let's set, employees, and let's define this to be a new employee, and let's call it okay, and these are degree. I don't know why it wants. Okay, so there are various ways of specifying this. So let's 4 and 1 say. All right, so now I want to put a manager in, though. And it tries to fill in stuff for me that I don't necessarily want. Okay, so now what is it complaining about? It says, oops, it says, parentheses is needed. Yeah, okay, and then now what it's complaining about, it can't find manager. Why? I haven't imported manager. So I fixed the imports, and there it is. What are you complaining about? Sometimes it has suggestions that aren't necessarily. All right, so now what can I not do? I cannot assign a person to it. So even though, okay, so it's not even going to let me get to first base with this, because remember now a person, all I need is a name, so that's okay. But it's not letting me assign a person to employees. Why? Because there's no way that a person is an employee. I mean, it could be, but there's no guarantee. So I cannot do this. All right, instead, we can give it an engineer. And all right. And what is it? Okay, let me put an engineer in. And yeah, it kind of, all right. So employee is a class that has, in this case, 2 subclasses, a manager and an engineer. And because employee is not abstract, because it's concrete, I can actually put just somebody who's just a regular old employee, or I can put a manager because a manager is an employee, or I can put an engineer because an engineer is an employee. And so now I can just, let's say who is everybody? Let's just print them out. Okay, so here are the ones that the array was printing. And we see that they just kind of went to the toString of that. Now our manager has an extra method called setBonus. Right now, actually, their bonus is 0. His or her bonus is 0. So that's not being affected. But now, look at what we can and can't do. So let's look at employees 1, which is a manager. and I want to set their bonus. Now I happen to know that employees 1, which I've declared to be an instance of manager, has the method, this object has the method set bonus. I know that because there it is. I have it right there. But this isn't allowing me to do that. Why not? See, the reason has to do with the difference between the compiler and the virtual machine. Those are two different entities. They're obviously related in some way. But as far as the compiler is concerned, if I have declared a variable, in this case to be of an type employee, there is no guarantee that when it comes time to implement this method, the virtual machine is not going to be able to guarantee that this method exists, because this method does not exist in employee. So the compiler will say no can do. And that's, remember we talked about casting. Now if I am 100% sure that when I go to invoke this method it's going to be there, what I can do is I can cast it. I can cast my employee to a manager. And I need a couple of sets of parentheses. So what this does is this says that this variable I know to be a manager. It's still complaining because you see, object reference invoking a method binds tighter than casting. So what I have to do is I have to put the parentheses right here. And now the compiler is happy. And this will actually work. Let me set this to something big. So now when I print this, the salary is going to be reflected. Okay, so compare the salary here with the salary after I give it 100% bonus. It's twice as big. Okay, well that was fun. Let's see if we can promote our engineer to a manager. Okay, so let's try to give our engineer friend a bonus. Now again, the compiler says, hey, you know what you're doing, which is sometimes true. So the compiler says, okay, this could happen. Why? Because when I look down, because manager is a subclass of employee, the cast could work. It could work. So the compiler says, you know what you're doing. I'll let this through. Now, here's the problem. I'm invoking a method, except because you're an engineer does not have that method. So what's going to happen? We're going to get lots of red and green and blue. Okay, so what does it say? We actually get a class cast exception that says engineer cannot be cast to manager. So the compiler said, it could happen. The virtual machine said, no way. You gave me an engineer and tried to invoke and tried to cast it to, it actually wouldn't let that go. It tried to cast it to a manager, but says, hey, if you look at the class diagram, an engineer has no way that an engineer can be cast to a manager. But because the variable type was declared to be employee, it could happen. See, so this is going to give an error. Okay, here's the thing. Notice that in this array, and Java is very strict about arrays, and in a few classes we're going to talk about the ability to have expanding arrays, because those of you who've worked with scripting languages are used to the fact that if I have an array and I decide I want to add some more stuff to it, I just add it and the array expands to do that, right? In Java, that doesn't happen. If I do this array here, this employee array is of size 3 and nothing can change that instance. Now I can reassign this variable to be a bigger array, but then I lose everything that I had before. Now there are methods that can kind of copy stuff over and expand it, whatever. But at the base level, once I've declared that is this object, this array object, cannot be changed in terms of its size. We'll talk about things that can. But here, it's like, if I only want to do things that every employee has, in this case it was just a toString, which every object has, then there's no, it lets me do that without regard. Notice I put 3 different types of things in here, but the 3 things I put in have been consistent because they're part of the class hierarchy. In other words, an employee is an employee, a manager is an employee, and an engineer is an employee, and that means that they can be put into this array without any problem. The restriction being that the only things I can do with that now are the things that are in employee, even though there are other things, such as, say, set bonus, which exist in some of these objects but not in other objects. And so without the cast, I can't use those things even though they're there. Okay, so the key concept here that I'm trying to emphasize is that the declared variable type provides one level of, one level of control at the compiler level, but the actual instance of an object is something else entirely, and the identity of an object has to do with what it has been instantiated in, not what variable type it has been declared to be. Those are 2 different things. Okay, so that's